The Marquis Theater opened its doors in 1986, but its controversial history dates back to the 1970s, a time of decline in Times Square and lost revenue in the Broadway theater district.
The Marriott Marquis responds to a moment, kind of a dark moment in New York City's history. It was still the city of the mean streets. There was a fear of New York at that time, and yet the theater was a major generator of tourism.
Unlike today, where there's one or two shows lining up constantly to go into any Broadway theater, at that time, theaters would sit dark for a year or two.
So how do you bring people to the Broadway theater without having them have to mingle with the hustlers and the X-rated theaters on Times Square? How do you bring them in without making them experience that?
In 1973, developer and architect John Portman announced plans to bring a new design to the heart of Times Square, a 2,000-room hotel with a 1,600-seat theater located on the 3rd floor. Audiences would go through the hotel to get to the theater.
So you walk into a space that's kind of a cocoon, and then you can feel sort of safe in that. Unlike earlier theaters on Broadway, this theater is actually entered from the inside. So it's almost like a suburban shopping mall set down in the middle of one of the great urban squares. The most distinguishing characteristic is a multi-story atrium and an exposed elevator. So the drama, instead of being on the street, is actually in the building.
It was theater owner Jimmy Nederlander Sr. who first recognized the importance of a large modern theater in the heart of Times Square.
The name of the game is seats. If you can't play at a lot of these small theaters because they don't have the capacity to gross enough to pay them. So I decided a long time ago that we needed larger theaters. First one was the Marquis. You know how I got that? I called John Portman. He says, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'd like to take the theater, and that's what happened.
In 1982, a protest erupted in the theater community when 5 theaters were demolished to make room for the Marriott Marquis Hotel and Theater.
The new theater's construction was very heavily opposed because it required the demolition of 5 theaters, 3 of which had been the site of innumerable, incredibly memorable productions.
We had to be arrested to this extent to say this is how firmly we believe about protecting these theaters.
But our major fight now is to declare the whole Broadway area an historic district, so every theater is protected.
The positive thing out of what was a controversial experience was that the landmarking laws came into place for the balance of the Broadway theaters.
In 1986, the Marquis Theater opened with the hit musical Me and My Girl. Since then, it has presented successful shows and revivals, including Thoroughly Modern Millie, which made Sutton Foster a star.
For when he comes crawling, I'm not falling. Shout hooray and hallelujah.
I was the understudy for Millie, and about a week before we started rehearsals, the woman playing Millie got sick, and I stepped in for her. And at the end of the run, they're like, we're gonna take the show to Broadway, and we want you to play the part on Broadway. And I was like, okay, I don't know.
Forget about the boy, forget about the boy, forget about
They took a big leap and gave me like the opportunity of a lifetime and changed my career.
Over time, the Marquis Theater has become an integral part of the Broadway landscape.
What has happened is, to return Times Square to its original neon-lit garishness and theatricality, the building is virtually invisible now because it's fully covered by signage, as all of Times Square is.
As the city has changed and Times Square has changed, I feel that the hotel and the theater, to a certain extent, have sort of warmed up as well and been embraced by the city.
It was a catalyst. It was an unfortunate experience for the community, but our community has dealt with hardships before, and it's risen above them and to do greater things, and this was one of them.